In this lesson, we'll learn how we can start to access the components of Softimage geometry. Okay, so for this example, I'm just going to be starting with a blank scene. So let's go ahead and expand this viewport. And let's start with a primitive. So let's go to Get Primitive. We'll start with a polygon torus. So this is going to be found kind of in the middle here. Okay, we'll go ahead and leave everything set to its default. Just to make things a little bit easier, we'll set this to a shaded view. Now, a piece of geometry in Softimage, or any 3D application for that matter, is made up of a series of components. Now, learning how to access and control these components is going to be very, very important for any sort of modeling work that we do. Now, within Softimage, there are a couple of different ways to actually go about accessing a piece of geometry's components. And in fact, the type of components that you can access is actually a little bit different depending on the type of geometry that you use. And we'll talk about that here in just a few minutes. Now for now, working on this polygon object, if we wanted to actually access the components, again, this can be done in a few ways. One method is to actually use these select features up here. So if I wanted to access the points of this polygon, the points are essentially the vertices, so that's these little blue dots. You notice that when I access or enter this point mode, that my wireframe turns yellow. That's indicating that I am currently in a component mode. Now I can come in and start to select these different vertices or these different points. So I can come in and just simply drag select. You can see those points become active. Now at this point, I can just press the V key on my keyboard to switch to my translate tool and come in and start to move those. Now here's something that you'll need to be aware of. If I were to come in and now try to select these other points back here, you notice if I try to simply left click and drag that I'm actually moving my other points. And this is just because of Softimage's default mode where anytime we click outside these manipulators, we're still in a simple transform. So to get around this, we could press and hold the T key on our keyboard, make our selection, and then let off. All right. Now the T key is essentially the keyboard shortcut to access your points. So just remember T to tag a point. Now, anytime we are finished with a component mode, and we're finished making any adjustments that we want, again, in this case with these points, just pressing and holding the T key, make my selection, and then let off again. Now, if I am finished working on these different points and I'm ready to go back to an object mode, again, a couple of different ways of going about that. Either I could click on this object button right up here, or I could just quickly tap the space bar and send me back to an object mode as well. And I can tell I'm back in an object mode because my wireframe has gone back to being white. Now, in addition to these points, we also have edges. So if I click on edges, edges are essentially these yellow lines that are connecting at least two vertices or 2 points. So if I'm in edge mode, again, I can come in, grab several edges. I can shift click to grab multiple edges if I want. And again, with these selected, tap the V key on my keyboard. Now I can start to move these around. Same as with the points. You can notice if I actually come in and try to click outside, that nothing happens, or that rather I'm actually moving these edges instead of actually selecting more edges. So to get around this, we need to use the keyboard shortcut, and that keyboard shortcut is the E key. Just remember E for edges. So if I press and hold the E key, I can come in, make my selection. If I press Shift E, I can make more selections. As soon as I let off, we're now back to our translate tool. All right, and once again, if I'm finished working in edge mode, quickly tap the space bar, and now we're back in object mode. The one component that we have left is polygons. Once again, if I were to click on the polygon button, the polygon is basically one of these flat faces that connects several edges together. Now, you'll notice that if I come in here and try to select, let's say, this polygon right here, that nothing's happening. And the reason for this is that in order to select a polygon, you need to make sure that it is completely contained within the selection. Now, I can actually see that the selection's been made. And once again, tap the V key on my keyboard, I can start to move these around. Or we could also scale and rotate any of these components as well. Again, once I'm finished, quickly tap the spacebar, and there we go. So the keyboard shortcuts, once again, it's going to be T to tag a point, E to switch to an edge, and to get to polygons, this is going to be the Y key. So if I tap the Y, there we go. And again, tap my spacebar to get back to an object mode. Now, in addition to just having these basic object modes, we also have what's called a raycast selection for each one of these. Now, if I were to expand this select menu, we can go to modes, and in addition to accessing these same options for point, edge, and polygon, this is exactly the same features that we were accessing over here through this menu. You'll notice that each one of these also has what's called a raycast mode. So we have a raycast edge and a raycast polygon. Now, these have a little bit different keyboard shortcut. So for example, raycast edge is going to be I, raycast polygon is U. Now let me show you what the real difference is between a raycast and a normal selection. We could see this if we were to go to edge mode. So if I press the E key on my keyboard to go to edge, you notice that if I were to come in here and drag a selection, that not only does it select all these edges in front, but it also selects any edges back behind here. Now this can result in some unwanted selections or accidental selections of some of these edges. So this is where the raycast selection comes in. This is really, really nice. Again, raycast selection for edges is I. So if I tap the I key on my keyboard, now you can see if I were to click and drag that I can come in here and select these edges. But what's really nice is that I don't have to worry about any edges on the backside being accidentally selected. So the raycast selection only selects the edges or the components that are currently visible. And if I press and hold the Shift key on my keyboard as I click and drag, I can drag all along this surface, select all of these edges, and the whole time I don't ever have to worry about any selections accidentally happening on this backside. Again, when we're finished, tap the spacebar to go back to object mode. The raycast selection for polygons is the U key. So again, if I quickly tap the U key on my keyboard, you can see now, if I just simply click on a polygon, that it now becomes active. And I can likewise just simply come in, click and drag to make any selection that I want. I can hold the Shift key to continue adding to my selections. And again, the whole time I can make absolutely certain that there's never anything on the back side of my object being accidentally selected. So as we get into our modeling lessons, we're going to be using these different component modes a lot. This is an absolutely essential skill that you're going to have to learn if you are going to be doing any sort of modeling in Softimage. So remembering these keyboard shortcuts and using those to jump back and forth between these different component modes is probably the most efficient way to go. So if at any point in time, if you forget any of the keyboard shortcuts, just remember that those can always be found underneath the Select tool, under Modes, and you can see the different keyboard shortcuts for points, edges, raycast edges, polygons, raycast polygons, and so forth. You notice that there is also what's called an extended mode, and we'll actually look at those in our next lesson. So for now, again, if we were to quickly tap the spacebar, that sends us back to an object mode. Now the last thing I want to do before we wrap up this lesson is really just more of a personal preference of mine, and that is, again, if I were to quickly press the U key on my keyboard, if I were to have some kind of a transform tool active, so in my case something like the translate tool, again, if I wanted to come in here and make another selection, I can't do that without actually pressing and holding the U key, make my selection, and then let off. Now, again, as a matter of personal preference, I really don't like to work that way. I actually like to have the freedom of being able to come in here and make additional selections. Now, within Softimage, this is a feature that we could enable. Now, this is something that we looked at in one of our earlier lessons, but if we go into the transform and all the way down at the bottom, if we go down to our transform preferences, we can choose what happens whenever we click outside the manipulator. By default, Softimage has this to a simple transform, which is why anytime we click outside, we're actually moving objects around. Again, as a matter of personal preference, I like to have this set to my select tool. So that way, now anytime I click outside the manipulators, I don't have to worry about pressing and holding the keyboard shortcut for that tool. So I find that this is actually a much, much easier way to work. So from this point forward, I am going to have my select tool set to this particular setting. And really, I would recommend that you probably do the same thing. You'll find that this is a much easier way to work. So with this is again, just a basic look at some of the different component types that we have available in Softimage. Now, in our next lesson, we're going to take a look at some slightly more advanced topics that relate to these different components.